Good evening, everyone, and welcome again to episode 6 of the Digital Dialogue series titled Examining Internet Shutdowns and the Effects on Information Access. We are thrilled to have you all here for what promises to be a thought provoking discussion. Now, introducing myself, I am Advocate Rasmi Wizel, Program Associate at the PORCH project at Youth Innovation Lab, and I'll be your moderator for the next hour and a half. It is a privilege to host this dialogue, and I really look forward to exploring this critical issue with our distinguished panelists and our participants. Before we begin, for a smoother experience, I'd like to request everyone to please keep their microphones muted unless you are invited to speak, and we encourage everyone to turn on your cameras to make the session more interactive. Along with that, I kindly remind everyone to rename yourself with your full name and the country name you are joining from. And if you have any questions in between the main Q&A session, please feel free to drop them in the chat and we will be addressing them during the open floor discussion at the end. Also, please note that this session will be recorded and may be shared on our platforms. So if you have any concerns regarding this, please feel free to reach out to us at info@youthinnovation.org. This discussion is meant to foster meaningful engagement, and while our speakers will share their personal insights, these do not necessarily reflect the official stance of Youth Innovation Lab, our donors, and our partner organizations. With that said, let's aim for a constructive and enriching conversation today. Before we dive into the today's discussion, let me briefly introduce the PORCH initiative. PORCH is led by Internews in collaboration with regional partners such as TATL, CUTS, Digital Turtles, Youth Innovation Lab, and Digitally Right. This initiative focuses on strengthening the digital rights ecosystem across South Asia with a particular emphasis on empowering youth and women to actively engage in key policy discussions around internet governance, privacy, content regulation, access, and freedom of expression. Now, I would also like to highlight how significant or important today's topic is. In an era where access to the internet has become synonymous with access to information, expression, and opportunity, the increase in internet shutdown globally and particularly in South Asia raises urgent concerns about the effects on human rights and the free flow of information. According to Access Now, an international organization committed to defending digital rights, authorities worldwide deliberately interrupted internet access 283 times across 39 countries in 2023 alone. Focusing on South Asia, India, the world's largest democracy, recorded the highest number of internet shutdowns with a staggering 116 incidents that left millions without access to information. Similar troubling shutdowns were also observed in Pakistan and Bangladesh. Along with that, Nepal also had banned TikTok on November 13, 2023, aligning itself with this wave of digital repression. However, at present, this ban has been uplifted. All these shutdowns have concealed violence, war crimes, and attacks on democracy, severely infringing upon the rights of millions. And these events beg a critical question: what does the future hold for democracy and digital rights in a world increasingly reliant on technology? With that said, now I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists for today. First, we have Namrata Maheshwari. Namrata serves as a senior policy counsel and encryption policy lead at Access Now, where she leads the organization's policy and advocacy efforts across South Asia and globally on encryption policy. Our areas of focus include data protection, content governance, cybersecurity, internet shutdowns, and engaging and emerging tech. Previously, she consulted on the Freedom, Security, and Technology project with the Center for Democracy and Technology. Namrata is also a qualified lawyer in India and has earned her LLM from Columbia Law School as a Stone Scholar focusing on technology policy and digital governance. Now, next we are joined by Miraj Chowdhury. Miraj is the founder of Digitally Right in Bangladesh, focusing on the intersection of media technology, and society. With nearly 18 years of experience in journalism, research, and media development, he has worked as a regional editor at the Global Investigative Journalism Network and has served as an adjunct faculty teaching journalistic research. Miraj is also a 2020 GNI Internews Digital Rights Fellow and sits on the boards of Media Resources Development Initiative and Sustainable Journalism Partnership. I would like to thank both Namrata and Miraj for joining us today. Now we'll be directing questions to each of you alternately to keep the conversation flowing smoothly. Now, without further ado, I'd like to get started. Namrata, let's begin with you. Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. Thanks, Rashmi.
Okay. Now, I would like to ask you a question. The question goes by, Namrata, can you provide an overview of what internet shutdowns are, including the different forms they take, such as blackouts, targeted platform blocks, or mobile network restrictions? What are the typical reasons given by the governments for imposing these measures?
Sure. Thanks. And thanks again, Rashmi, for organizing this conversation. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and to share the panel with Miraj, with whom, of course, we work very often. To answer your question, Rashmi, there are a few working definitions of what an internet shutdown is, but the way Access Now and the Keep It On Coalition, which is a coalition of over 200 organizations globally that are fighting internet shutdowns, it's a coalition that Access Now helps run. We define internet shutdowns as an intentional disruption of internet or electronic communications, rendering them inaccessible or effectively unusable for a specific population or within a location. Now, this is a definition that has also been adopted in a range of United Nations reports and special rapporteurs reports. I mean, to give you an example, under this definition for us, a specific app being blocked or a specific platform being blocked would also constitute a shutdown, which means that TikTok being banned in Nepal, for example, is something that constitutes an internet shutdown for us and would therefore should be combated accordingly. Now, typically, the way that governments order them, it's a combination of things. Sometimes they are blanket shutdowns, which means that internet access is completely restricted, whether it's mobile internet or broadband internet. And it is, well, it's the opposite of net neutrality in that it doesn't matter which platform you're trying to access, you cannot access it. So that's like your blanket internet shutdown. The other way that the measure is enforced is through throttling, which is slowing down access. So imagine that in a world of 5G, if access is restricted to 2G internet, that is an example of throttling. And then the third category is slightly more targeted bans of, as I mentioned, specific platforms and specific apps. So these are the different measures. The ways in which they are executed technologically also differs. Largely, it is the authority sending a letter to the telecom service provider and the internet service provider to say stop providing service in such and such area. And sometimes it's a little more technical than that. Sometimes it is infrastructural damage, supposedly, such as subsea cables and so on. So these are the various contexts within which these measures are imposed. As to the second part of your question about the reasons that are given for imposing such measures and restricting access to the internet, uh, it ranges right from maintaining quote unquote public law and order to preventing cheating in examinations and to trying to curb the spread of misinformation or disinformation or fake news, whatever you want to call it. Um, Again, like it's important, and we'll get to this as we go deeper into the conversation, but it's important to one, inquire what these reasons are, whether there is an actual nexus between preventing access to the internet and achieving the goal of, let's say, maintaining public law and order, curbing the spread of misinformation. And personally, to me, the one that stands on the weakest ground is preventing cheating in an examination. Like it's highly disproportionate to completely shut down access in an entire area for that reason. There are equally orders that are either not made public or don't clearly set out the reason for the shutdown. So there is always, when conducting these studies and this advocacy, there's always a patch or this nebulous area that one operates with because we don't really know why that shutdown is being imposed. And equally, sometimes when the reason is stated, what is stated versus what the actual speculative reason is based on what people on the ground are experiencing, there is a discrepancy between the two. All of this to say that there are some things that are known, some things that are known but not said on paper, and there are some things that are speculative. So it's with this combination of things that we approach our work on internet shutdowns.
Thank you, Namrata, for that comprehensive overview of internet shutdowns and the various forms they take. It is very clear that government gives different justification, often use different justifications for the shutting down the internet during exams, protest, political situations, giving the reasons like security and security issues and to maintain law and order and so on. Now, let's take this discussion further and explore the effectiveness of these measures. Miraj, with Bangladesh experiencing multiple internet shutdowns, I'd love to hear your perspective. Bangladesh is no stranger to internet shutdowns. We all know that, having experienced multiple forms of shutdowns over the years since 2009, from wholesale network blackouts to blocking mobile speeds during protests and elections, while the government often blames technical problems or cites security reasons and the need to combat disinformation. Most shutdowns occur during protests and elections and political events. In your opinion, Miraz, do these broad and disproportionate measures effectively stop the spread of disinformation and propaganda online? Do you think these are necessary or proportionate actions?
Yeah, thank you for having me in this particular important discussion. On response to your question, I think the connection between internet shutdown and whether it is able to tackle disinformation is not well established. No, so there has been various instances in Bangladesh where internet shutdown was imposed, arguing that it will tackle disinformation, but we have seen that it didn't. No, so rather, according to different case studies that has been done, we can rather say that rather than tackling disinformation, what it creates as an is an obstacle to access right information during a critical time. No, so say for example, so there is a say a political event or a communal violence going on in and then government shut down internet in the fear that the violence would spread, but we have seen that violence never stops. Rather, what ordinary people who have been dependent on information, accessing information through social media channels and news websites, they cannot access the real information. Rather, even if the violence is originated from say hate speech or disinformation, what happens is when you shut down internet, the wrong information remains online because the internet shutdown was imposed after that particular messaging. But when fact checkers and different news outlets are trying to provide you right information, because of the internet shutdown, people cannot really access that. So according to my understanding, it really worsens the situation rather tackling it properly. Yeah, I think you are mute. And before our host, to be frank, joins back, probably facing an internet issue, but not only that, it really doesn't address the spread of disinformation and curb the access to information, but it also affects various types of rights like freedom of association, freedom of expression. No, so if you want to you have your say on a particular issue that is affecting that particular event responsible for internet shutdown, you cannot express yourself. No one is going to listen. You know, so it has direct impact on that. If it is targeting a protest, I think this directly impacts people's rights of association. So you have the right of association, but so it has direct effect of access to information as well. So it has rippling effects on various type of human rights, both digital and physical human rights. Not only about it is disinformation, but it is potentially obstructing various human rights in any country where it is imposed. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Miraz. I had just had an internet issues. Thank you, Miraz, for those insights. It's interesting to hear how these shutdowns are used in Bangladesh and whether they actually achieve the intended goals of stopping disinformation or whether they have a more political purpose. Building on that, let's look at the broader social, economic, and human rights impact of these shutdowns. Namrata, could you elaborate on the broader social, economic, and human rights impacts of internet shutdowns, especially regarding restriction on access to information and freedom of expression? For example, the 212-day internet shutdown in Manipur from May to December 2023, it affected over 3.2 million people and had significant repercussions. This prolonged shutdown severely hindered women's ability to document atrocities, including gender-based violence, complicating efforts to hold perpetrators accountable. How do you think such shutdowns undermine democratic processes and weaken human rights protections?
So I think earlier you could divide your life very squarely into your offline life and your online life, right? That is no longer the case. It is these two cannot even be very clearly distinguished anymore. The lines are very blurred, which means that all the rights that we need to be able to go about our business daily, to be able to stay safe within a crisis situation, all of those rights that we needed offline, we equally need them online because the platforms where we now exercise them have taken on a digital form. Now, I think one moment, if I can call it a moment, that really drove home this point was COVID, right? The pandemic. All our lives, the shift online accelerated in a matter of months and years. All of us now rely on the internet, even in a non-crisis situation, right? For education, for healthcare, for essential commodities, and then of course for deeper like freedom of expression reasons, protests, etc. All of these things. So I think that the importance of the internet is not lost on anybody in the digital landscape that we are experiencing today. As Miraj indicated right before you came back online, Rashmi, the rights that it impacts are several, right? From the right to freedom of expression, right to privacy, right to freedom of assembly, right to information, right to earn a livelihood, and the list goes on, right? And it's not just all of us, it's experts on human rights who have made these observations. United Nations special rapporteurs have also said that internet shutdowns are an extremely drastic measure, that when governments resort to the internet kill switch, it impacts human rights in an extremely deep manner. And they have also urged governments to not hit the kill switch of the internet and to maintain open and unhampered access. So even just on the right to livelihood and right to earn a livelihood aspect, which is often not very clearly drawn out, to give you just one example, and there are several studies in India, 88% of gig workers rely on online platforms to be able to earn their livelihood. And that's a massive percentage. The gig economy in itself is massive. So not only does it have an impact on individual and an individual's ability to earn a livelihood, but also the economy of the country at large, right? When Bangladesh had a spate of shutdowns recently, there were several reports about how it impacted the outsourcing agency industry in Bangladesh. It was, I think, the figures ran into hundreds of thousands of crores. And of course, Miraj would know a lot more about the impact on the ground in Bangladesh, but this is true for all countries. In India, the figure runs into, I think it is hundreds of millions of US dollars a year that we lose to internet shutdowns. Now, this is on the economy aspect of it, but coming back to the individual and community fundamental rights, the example you gave of Manipur, right? I think that's a very glaring example. People there were without the internet for over 200 days. What happened then is that the internet shutdown became a cloak for the violence that was happening on the ground. And because of the nature of that violence, it of course had a gendered impact. It disproportionately impacted women. Um, and it wasn't just about the inability to share one particular video that later went viral, led to some slow accountability and attention from the international media and national media and government. But it's about the continuing trend of impunity that the internet shutdown then perpetuates. What reporters on the ground, people who are facing the violence on the ground, are not able to share that information. They are not able to access information that might perhaps get them to safety. So, in terms of becoming a cloak for this violence and impunity, internet shutdowns are particularly insidious because, in one way, they are a low hanging fruit for law enforcement to try to quickly contain a situation and seem like something is being done about a problem on the ground. But the impact that it has on the fundamental rights of people, on their ability to keep themselves and the people they love safe, to express themselves freely, to protest safely, all of these things are impacted deeply, and it is inherently disproportionate. There is absolutely no justification of an internet shutdown. Of course, fundamental rights have reasonable restrictions, but there is no justification for a shutdown that, to my mind, falls within the legal definitions of what reasonable restrictions look like.
Thank you, Namrata, for shedding light on the human rights and socio-economic impacts, thus this particularly with your example of Manipur. It's clear that these prolonged shutdowns don't just restrict communication. They severely hinder people's ability to document and respond to violations of rights. Now, Miraj, turning to Bangladesh, we have seen similar situations where shutdowns have occurred during protests, multiple protests. Bangladesh recently, like Namrata mentioned, Bangladesh recently experienced one of its longest near total internet shutdown when Awami League led government ordered a nationwide blackout on July 18, 2024. All forms of online communications were disrupted across the country, cutting it off from the outside world amidst large-scale protest by the student anti-discrimination movement and the government's brutal crackdown. Disruptions to 3G and 4G services left people with only phone calls and SMS as a means of communication. Could you share more about the current situation of internet shutdowns in Bangladesh, particularly in light of incidents like this? Also, Miraz, how have these shutdowns affected access to information and digital rights in the country?
Yeah, sure, Rashmi. So I think Bangladesh observes, if we consider nationwide shutdown, I think Bangladesh observed is one of its longest internet shutdown in last 3 months, no, previous since July and August. So I think it is, as a shutdown, it is very unique in terms of a case study, because it is not only about 5 days of blackout. There was social media blocking in different phase of time. There was internet throttling, as slowing down the speed of mobile internet in different phase of time. This is one side of it, but we have also, it is also unique because of how this shutdown was implemented in Bangladesh, no? So we have seen that there was instruction to operators and ISPs that you slow down the speed or you block that site. But at some point, organizations, institutions like NTMC, National Telecommunication Monitoring Center, they actually use their own capacity to restrict internet in many ways without going into the without asking the ISPs. We have heard that there has been attempt by Department of Telecommunication to really implement this shutdown. There was use of IIGs. It is infrastructure, no, the internet gateways to censor some internet access and blocking, uh, and 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 everything you may want to see in an internet shutdown ecosystem, you have seen that in particular 20 days of time, no? So it is, we are doing a research on that right now. It is in a final stage. So in terms of impact, so so when this whole blackout was going on, there was also a curfew going on. So you do not have internet access at the same time as you do not have mobility. So I think the economic impact was devastating. Yeah. So for example, one trade body, Association of Business, they mentioned that it could be, in that whole period of time, the whole economic loss could be something like $10 billion. Now, so often these estimates are very reserved estimates, because you cannot really see who is benefiting from internet in what way. You may see that probably a farmer is producing crop, he is not connected to internet, but you don't know the whole supply chain probably is dependent on internet, and you cannot calculate that impact, no? So any impact of internet shutdown that we have seen, being calculated is, I think, it is overtly underestimated in many ways. So the economic impact is huge, but the impact on freedom, democracy, it's, I think, it is not. It is even more. So, for example, a large number of population, like 170 million people, do not know when what is going on in the country. For the particular 5 days of shutdown that happened between 2000, like 17 July to say onwards, 24 5 days straight away. So I think what happened in those days is the highest number of death in protest. No, so I think it is the political and democratic impact on democracy of internet shutdown is quite high. So as Namrata mentioned, it often becomes a cover up for violence. No, so we have seen that before, and we need to also understand that in many cases, often it comes as a justification to control, uh, to maintain public order and control violence, but the decisions are generally political decisions. No, uh, uh, even public order. So political protest becomes a public order from a political point of view. For others, it is exercising their political rights. No, so this is what happens. It further marginalizes the other side of the voice, and to be frank, strengthens digital authoritarianism in many ways. It is not just about access to information. I think it has become increasingly a tool of implementing digital authoritarianism in certain jurisdictions and countries. If it
Thank
answers
you,
your
Mira.
question.
Thank you, Miraj, for explaining the effects of shutdown in Bangladesh. Indeed, the July 2024 blackout, it is a stark example of how internet restrictions can paralyze not only communications during critical moments, but leave people disconnected, helpless and unable to access essential information. It is also and incidents. These are also the incidents that highly affect the democracy and economic field too. Now, with that, this raises the questions of how governments can balance national security with human rights. Namrata, despite the India's Supreme Court ruling in Anuradha Vasin versus Union of India, which mandates that internet shutdown orders be made public to promote transparency, but many states still fail to disclose these orders. As we have seen, the majority of recorded shutdowns up until 2024 lacked proper public access to these orders. This discrepancy between the court's directive and the government's actions raises serious concerns about states' accountability. In your view, Namrata, what legal reforms or policy adjustments are necessary to ensure that the compliance with transparency requirements and better protect human rights in light of the increasing number of internet shutdowns across India?
There have been quite a few efforts over the last 1 year to engender more accountability, whether from civil society or even parliament, litigation in courts. We haven't really seen concrete results just yet. And I think we need to start from the point of going into reverse gear as far as normalization of internet shutdowns is concerned. I think at some level, they have been made so normal that most people, even while reading the news, we have just internalized it as a very intuitive toolkit within law enforcement's or authorities' framework to kind of maintain situations. So, right, so just take a step back and question the impact of these internet shutdowns, the way any policy that is framed, right? Let's step outside of the tech policy space. Think of environmental policy, labor, employment, industry, companies. Usually policy objectives are always driven by demonstrative studies, right? Research and data that tells you what will be useful for what purpose. And I that has never been done for internet shutdowns. The scope, when it is proportionate, whether it is proportionate at all within our constitutional framework, within our international human rights framework, that questioning has never been done. there is no data to suggest that the goals and objectives for which internet shutdowns are employed and authorized are actually achieved by imposing internet shutdown. So I think the first step at a very fundamental principle level is to do that, is to question the normalization and to question the efficacy and to demand research and demonstrative studies, right, that show the impact. Um, as for procedural safeguards, before we get to the point of, like, is this proportionate or not, which, spoiler alert, as I already said before, to us, we any study meaningfully conducted about the impact assessment of internet shutdowns will lead to the conclusion that they are inherently disproportionate and therefore against constitutional values and international law, right? But until we get to that stage, procedural safeguards that people have recommended, some that are being proposed, and some that are still being sought for. One, as you said, was from the Supreme Court, right? They said several things, one of which was publish all your orders. The other thing they said was there should not be any infinite shutdowns, right? Like you cannot just say internet shutdown without a stop date to it. Now, what happened with that is either it's flouted, not respected, as in orders are still sometimes not published, or there are workarounds. So what happens is a shutdown will be imposed for 15 days, but on the 14th or 15th day, there will be another order imposing it for another 15 days. So it effectively in practice becomes an infinite shutdown. So I think looking at an independent assessment or review committee, the review committee that we have under Indian law, for example, is not independent at all. The functioning of it is not very regular, not very public. So the first thing that has to happen, and the India is in the process of um, implementing our new telecom law and formalizing the new set of rules under it. And what we are recommending is that at the very least, this review committee needs to be made completely independent of the executive, right? Because the authority that is imposing or issuing these orders cannot have any links with this review committee. Otherwise, there's no meaning to this review at all. Court is a very important stakeholder, the judiciary. The problem often is that by the time the order is published or by the time a litigant is able to go to court and the matter is heard, the shutdown has ended in most cases, unless, of course, there are situations like Manipur and Kashmir and others. So what happens then is that the court will typically say, well, internet is restored, so the matter now is infructuous. So there are a lot of technical challenges to invoking, court. Having said that, there have been some wins, and we should continue to explore like court as an avenue to, move the needle further. Parliament again has made efforts to get accountability from the government by asking questions like, is there a central database of all the shutdowns that you've imposed? Where are all these orders? Are you maintaining a centralized database or record? Have you analyzed the impact on fundamental rights? Have you analyzed whether there are other less intrusive measures to achieve the goals that you are stating? So, Parliament is asking these questions, which is which gives one hope, and there should be more of this. And lastly, I think we often forget to exert this pressure on telecom service providers and internet service providers. The lens is often just on the government, but we should be asking the companies to say, hey, if you are going to disrupt services, the least you can do is send a notification to all your users and subscribers and say internet will not be available from such and such time. Right? That's the very least you can do. At best, push back against those orders. You also have responsibilities against your business and human rights, or sorry, pursuant to your business and human rights obligations under UN, right? So push back. And if you don't want to do that for political considerations, commercial considerations, fine. Sending this notification is still well within your lane. So I do think it's a more multi-stakeholder approach. But we have seen some minor minimal wins, but then there are situations like what we saw in Bangladesh and Manipur, and there's no quantification of fundamental rights damage that can be done, right? So the goal ultimately is to just ban shutdowns as a measure. Question why larger quote unquote developed democracies do not impose shutdowns, right? So yeah, like I said, let's go back to why this is happening in the first place.
Thank you, Namrata, for highlighting the need for stronger. Thank you, Namrata, for highlighting the need for stronger legal reforms in order to ensure transparency and accountability in the enforcement of shutdowns, not only from the government side, but also from the telecommunication companies too. Your insights on how governments can still bypass the Supreme Court's rulings brings to the light the importance of legal frameworks that protects citizens' rights. Now, let's focus on the impact of these restrictions, how these internet shutdowns have impacted the journalism sector. Miraj, in Bangladesh, journalists faces enormous challenges due to these shutdowns. It has hindered their ability to report freely and effectively. How have internet restrictions and legal hurdles impacted investigative journalism in the country? Can you share the specific instances where these challenges have affected the media landscape? Additionally, I would also like you to focus on what innovative strategies are journalists employing to navigate these barriers while ensuring they fulfill their responsibilities to inform the public.
Thank you, Rashmi. I think not in Bangladesh, but wherever there is shutdown, there is certain impact on media and information ecosystem. No? So now the impact varies. Number one, it depends on how long the shutdown is. What is the scope of the shutdown, not in terms of length, but also in terms of infrastructure and services. No? So for example, it has different impact when a social media platform or messaging platform is blocked. It has different type of impact when it comes to network throttling, when internet speed is slow so that you cannot upload videos or see videos, on social media platforms. When it is long shutdown, like for 10 days, 15 days, 1 month, 200 days, the impact is completely different and devastating. So this is from impact side. In terms of circumvention and adaptation, so how you adapt with it, this is also dependent on what type of shutdown is implemented. No? So if it is small, targeted, short, it has one type of circumvention. And if it is long, if it is blackout, I think no circumvention works really. How you adapt is another way. No? So there are different adaptive approaches. I personally have done a study on 5 countries in Asia Pacific on how internet shutdown impacts media very specifically. No? So there are several layers of impact. So if you see a journalism, a media outlet or media environment, there are 3 elements into it. How news is produced, the production. Number two, how news is distributed. Like it can be distributed in many ways, distribution. And third, how news is consumed, the consumption. Yeah. So there is an underlying thing that is sustainability when it is comes to long shutdowns, how media really earns from it, and how does it impact their sustainability in cases of longer shutdowns. So this is another way of seeing it. Say, for example, if, and you also ask about adaptive strategies that we can talk about it. So number one, if it is a, say, social media ban, what happens? I think social media bans create a serious impact on news consumption at the beginning, because the most of the young people and people, they just scroll Facebook or Instagram or Twitter to access news. So when these platforms are blocked, I think the first thing is that they cannot access information from the desired platform. So for example, Twitter is open, Facebook is blocked, but my preference is Facebook. I know how Facebook works, how to search here, how to find content. My information ecosystem is based on Facebook. Even if you even if Twitter is open, as it is not your preferred medium, you will have that impact because you were not familiar with Twitter. No? So I think the consumption is heavily affected when it comes to social media or communication channels blocked. This has another impact on journalists, because, say, example, different type of violence is going on in different part of the world. People are having their say on social media platform. I cannot really directly access what people are saying on that specific platform. So not necessarily everyone is a Twitter or Instagram user, or not necessarily everyone is a Facebook user. So when you block a particular platform, a journalist is completely black about the users who preferred that platform to share their opinion or evidences. So it is not that 5 platforms are open, one is blocked. One is blocked because that is popular. More people access that. So this is one side of it. One is consumption and another is getting leads for news, information for news. So it also impacts news production and distribution. How? Because you have a Facebook page where certain media outlet publish a news, that particular subscribers or followers of that page do not get that news because that platform is blocked. So when it is throttling, the impact is different, I think even deeper. Throttling is imposed generally to control videos, no, because you can do the messaging and things, but videos have become a large source of open source evidence in contemporary journalism. Say, for example, something is happening in, say, US elections. Nepal, people from Bangladesh, Nepal, and India will follow Twitter and Facebook and probably Instagram, and would like to see what is going on in shorts, reels, or videos. So when there is throttling in your country, you really cannot uh, not only get information but also upload evidences for a greater audience. So it hampers access to information, but also for journalists it deprives them of evidences when it is most needed, because news is fast, news, the need is instant, the need of information is instant. But slowing down internet speed also affects revenue of media outlets. How? Because you can see that even in countries like ours, a lot of news channels, television channels, online outlets depends on content monetization. That means when there is less view, there is less money. No? So this is another way of assessing impact on media. But the most devastating impact is when it is a long shutdown. I have spoken to journalists in Kashmir. I think the whole media's ecosystem is ruined by long shutdown that happened since 2021. How? Because most independent media outlets are online. So when there is a long shutdown, blackout, you cannot produce news. You have no consumers of news. You do not have to run ads. Advertisers will not flock in. They will not give you money. And if it continues for 1 year, say 100 days, or even 10 days, it impacts your sustainability. You cannot earn. Even subscription systems. Now, right now, media subscription is much more internet based. So not only user generated revenue, not only crowdsourced revenue, not only subscription based revenue, not only clickbait revenue, most revenue models fail during long shutdowns. So it impacts media sustainability. During blackouts, even if it is not long, say 1 day to 5 day, it is darkness, no? So it creates darkness. So media cannot access anything. Even, for example, say some kind of protest is going on, there is police open fire or someone open fire, there are life losses. So a journalist who is on the spot, this newsroom doesn't know whether their colleague is safe. Neither he can communicate what is going on the field to his newsrooms other than calling over cell phone, given that that is available. Now problem is, if it is a very sensitive information and there is a surveillance regime in play, probably you are jeopardizing your safety by sharing sensitive information through phone because someone else is listening that. So it has a safety impact as well. No, it has a trauma impact as well. So I think that impact is versatile, from revenue to access to gathering evidences, information, from production, distribution, and consumption, and also safety. It impacts everything in a news ecosystem. On adaptive strategies, I think it also depends on what kind of shutdown it is. For if it is like a blocking, I think people in South Asia use VPNs a lot. They now know that VPNs can save them. But there is a gap between urban journalists and rural journalists. To what extent digital literacy do they have? We don't know. No? So there is certainly a lack. So I think they are more vulnerable to it. When it is a slowing down of speed, I think there are satellite connections, broadband connections that people use. But what it does, even if you adapt, say you have a point where you take where you go and use broadband internet to share your news to your station, what happens is like it takes time to go from point A to point B in a very dangerous situation. That means that news is delayed for that particular period, even though you are adapting. So when it is long shutdown, I think sometimes news outlets go back to basics. No, so for example, what is going on in Myanmar? They even create a magazine or pamphlet, and they share it via pen drive, flash drive, so that people can read it. There are now people trying to use. Sorry, there is azan going on. It may be noisy. So there are instances where people try to use satellite connections, internet connections, uh, and that has worked for many. But to be frank, it is often resource intensive. So a lot of media outlets, independent and small, they do not have that resource to adapt, even though they know how to use it. So I would like to stop there.
Thank you, Miraj, for highlighting how these internet shutdowns have a huge impact on journalism and the media outlets. Now, moving on, Namrata, I'd like to return to the broader picture of India's digital landscape. India is positioning itself as a global leader in technology through its ambitious Digital India initiative. Yet, it holds the troubling record for the highest number of internet shutdowns. In 2023 alone, Indian government imposed internet shutdowns for 116 times, severely disrupting the lives of millions. How do you reconcile these two contrasting narratives, India's push for digital advancement and its continued reliance on internet shutdown?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a dichotomy in India's image globally, right? On the one hand, India certainly is one of the pioneers of technology, digital governance, the tech underlying the development of digital public infrastructure. The merits and demerits of it are a separate conversation, but just in terms of the ability to roll it out, India has come forward as being one of the leaders in the space, and that has shown in the G20 conversations and other international fora. But at the same time, as you said, in 2023, India imposed 116 internet shutdowns. And again, these are just the ones that were documented. There are several that go undocumented. In the last 5 years, India has imposed 500 shutdowns, 500 documented shutdowns. So, I mean, how do you reconcile these two very, very contrasting images and trends? Um, I mean, to my mind, I don't think you can. One thing has to change, and which is that internet access has to be made more reliable and stable. Because we are pushing for the development of digital public infrastructure. We are pushing for more platforms to be digitized, for the ability of people to get access to more services to be converted into online spaces. So if we are doing that, what has to follow is reliability on being able to access the internet, right? If we are currently, I think there's the goal of 50 in 5. We want to export the digital public infrastructure to 50 countries in 5 years, and it is already operational in 15 countries. I think it is worth looking at the efficacy of these models in countries where internet shutdown, or well, internet access has been more stable, where internet penetration has been more. And that's another point, right? We cannot look at the impact of shutdowns without looking at penetration figures. 5 years ago, or maybe like less than a decade ago in India, internet penetration was at about 13 to 14%. And now that figure is dramatically higher. So what happens when you throttle the internet, or impose an internet blackout, is that more of those people are not able to access the very things that you have now made accessible only online. And there are two problems here. One, that more people have been actually, in some ways, well, it's a benefit. Naturally, it's a benefit to be able to access the internet as a platform. But that also means more people are reliant on these platforms. So that has to be stable, right? And the second thing is, it has been digitized in a way that there are no analog alternatives. Now, typically, the way this should be done is that at least for a period, there has to be analog alternatives. not just because consent has to be meaningful, people should have a choice, but because naturally there are going to be teething issues with any tech. So the moment you make it only digital, there is that issue, right? So there are these practical issues as well. We are talking at a theoretical level about whether it's justifiable, what the impact on rights is, but there are these very practical technological issues that get lost even by people who perhaps mean well when they are trying to push for these digital models, right? One example of how this happened in India, in Punjab, there was a slightly prolonged shutdown. And there is a FASTag in India, which basically it's a sticker on vehicles that helps people pay toll electronically. What happened was people who were trying to cross the Punjab border into Haryana or Delhi or wherever at that point and did not have enough balance on their FASTag cards, they were stuck at the border because the internet was not available and they could not recharge the card, therefore. And so they were stuck, they were rendered immobile. So that's just one example of what it means to, on the one hand, accelerate digitization, but on the other hand, um, uh, impose such rampant restrictions on internet access, right? And that's just, again, like I said, one example. The last thing that I'll close with is that these measures have a perhaps inadvertent or unintended consequence of deepening the digital divide, which is counterintuitive for a country like that has the Digital India vision and so on. What I mean by deepens the digital divide is that often internet shutdowns target mobile internet services, not broadband. Broadband accounts for less than 5% of the entire country's connectivity, and broadband is mostly available in urban areas and with institutions and more well-resourced individuals and communities. Rural areas, the majority of the population, nearly 95% of India, still counts on mobile internet, which means when you impose these shutdowns and target mobile internet, you are again deepening that gulf between rural India and urban India and individuals and institutions. So, I mean, there are these various angles that need to be studied further, need to be talked about more, and need to be looked at more holistically when we look at what kind of shape Digital India is taking and what example it is setting.
Thank you, Namrata, for your insights on how India has two contrasting narratives with regards to its digital advancement and its continued reliance on internet shutdowns. It's fascinating and concerning to see how a country that aims to be a global tech leader continues to rely on internet shutdowns, undermining its own progress and global reputation. Miraj, similarly, Bangladesh had its own digital ambitions through the Digital Bangladesh initiative. The Bangladeshi government champions the vision of a digital Bangladesh aiming to connect all citizens regardless of the economic status, education, race, ethnicity, or gender through mobile communications and broadband internet for information exchange and accessing services. However, there has been notable contradictions to these visions, such as the 2019 internet shutdown in the Rohingya refugee camp in Cox's Bazar. Despite appeals from 50 rights and aid organizations, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, it took nearly a year to restore 3G and 4G services in those areas. In light of this, how do you view the contradiction between the government's Digital Bangladesh vision and these incidents of internet restrictions? How effective do you think is international advocacy in reversing or preventing these future shutdowns?
Yeah, thank you. Just I would like to add that digital Bangladesh is a past. The vision that was a very much a political vision of the Awami League government, and then they thought that digital Bangladesh was achieved, and there was a new vision that was called Smart Bangladesh. So a more connected Bangladesh. Again, the vision is vision. To be frank, even if you had a vision of a primitive Bangladesh, so internet should be the basis for it. Digital world doesn't mean that access to internet only. While access to internet is a constant, digital Bangladesh to anyone should mean that you have a constant access, but how equal it is, how accessible it is, how is the price okay for everyone? Are you creating, is this internet creating opportunities for everyone equally? Can you really generate enough businesses, enough economic and other social opportunities through these digital connections? So I think in any kind of policies, how you envision your country to be, internet access should be a backbone, and internet shutdown contradicts with every vision of development. So that is the, no matter how you name it. So this is only one side of it. Now that there is a new government coming in, they have their different priorities. So now they have their main priority is holding a good election, and then there will be we hope that there will be a stable political government to run after this interim government goes. I think any vision should lead to open, equitable, and uninterrupted access to internet for all. So at the core of it, but there are some challenges. One of the challenges is rooted in the existing laws and licensing regulations. So it gives government arbitrary power, or like they can shut down internet based on their judgments anytime. So this is how the law, different provisions of the law, different regulations in the licensing rules says. I think this is one side that needs to be addressed in coming days or years. How, if the law provides enough guardrails so that such this kind of censorship doesn't happen. So I think this is one side, but also there should be more transparency from the service providers as ISPs and mobile operators and others. So what kind of transparency? Namrata briefly mentioned that you need to disclose, so that internet will not be there in that particular time because of these and these instructions, and probably in these and these areas. But also you need to mention it in there, in your sustainability report, how you confronted this, or in your transparency report, what is your stance? Because I think, say for example, a lot of telecom companies subscribe to different standards, industry standards. What is your human rights standards when it comes to internet shutdown? That has to be very explicit. And I think South Asia is one of the region where it is least understood and least practiced, the tech transparency issues and accountability issues. So these are the two things, and going forward, the Bangladesh that we want to see, I think, needs to understand that internet shutdown is just one aspect of digital censorship. So sometimes there will be impact on how you regulate your data, that is stored within your jurisdiction and probably beyond, and how you govern content, regulate content. Say, for example, it can be a news website, it can be a blog, or it can be a social media platform. So no, I think there should be holistic approach in making digital ecosystem for more open and free. Not only that, and there should be legal consistencies in particular laws and areas where there are impact on internet freedom. So I think there is now a time to look it holistically, not only from Telecommunication Act level or from company transparency level, but from major 3 or 4 policies or law that is going to shape the digital environment and create opportunities. So if this is it, what you ask for, anything else you can ask, I can answer.
Uh, Thank you, Miraj. Could you also highlight about how effective is international advocacy in reversing or preventing future shutdowns?
Yeah, I think international and local advocacy both are effective. For example, uh, if you have a very strong civil society and a more open civic space, then local and internationally advocacy can join hands. International advocacy can support local advocacy in many ways, by providing information, analysis, and point of views, but also taking the local concerns in a global level. So this is how, not only the issuing a statement, but also in engaging in global discussions about a particular country. Problem is when you do not have enough civic space. So local civil society cannot operate. It is particular in that situation international advocacy becomes more important, because when local civil society organizations cannot speak because there is civic space is shrinking, I think organizations like Access Now, GNI, organizations like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, and others become so relevant, because then they become the mouthpiece of local organizations in many ways. No? So we have found international advocacy very important and effective in a Bangladeshi context, not only in terms of issuing statements, but creating a general awareness among people that internet shutdown is bad. It should be stopped. And whenever there is a change in understanding of how internet will be governed, I think change largely is shaped by popular perception. When people think it is bad, the legal changes are made very effectively. When people doesn't have that understanding that probably, yeah, internet shutdown, yeah, we cannot eat whatever, internet is not there, we don't care. But when people care about it, so then this kind of international advocacies play a role in shaping people's mind, because a lot of media outlets that cover this news, and it becomes an important issue in your social discourse. I think these are very relevant and effective. It has different levels of effectiveness in different times of political environment and different circumstances and context.
Thank you, Miraj, for discussing the tension between the Bangladeshi government's digital vision and the reality on the ground. Also, putting on your thoughts on international advocacy, what role can international advocacy play, and what more can be done to prevent future shutdowns for valuable insights. Namrata, as we look ahead, what viable alternatives to internet shutdowns would you propose for governments in South Asia, including India, Nepal, Bangladesh, and whole South Asian countries? How can these alternatives help maintain public order and counter misinformation without infringing on fundamental rights such as freedom of speech and access to information?
So I think before we look at alternatives, it is worth taking a step back and examining the objectives for which shutdowns are imposed, right? And question whether all of them are in fact legitimate reasons to restrict freedom of expression in the first place. Whether it is through an internet shutdown or anything else, are these legitimate goals at all? And are there ways to do that without having to restrict free expression, because ultimately that's a much higher threshold that needs to be fulfilled. To give you an example, I think across regions, one of the most often cited reasons is curbing the spread of misinformation, right? And I think we saw that, I mean, governments and platforms rushing to do something about it. Like we saw all of that on steroids in the context of the spate of elections that we've already seen this year and will continue to see through the rest of the year. And in the context of generative AI, right? All those debates around what exactly do we do with this misinformation problem, they became amplified and magnified. And I think that's worth looking deeper into and learning from. So when we look at what are the alternatives, the election periods gave us some insights into these alternatives, particularly on misinformation. So, of course, measures will vary. Different regions have different contexts and different needs, but that does not mean or that does not justify the imposition of rights restricting measures in one region and light touch measures in another. So, when I say we need to account for these differences, it is not to say that rights will be impacted to varying degrees. Fundamental rights are the same for people across the board. What we need to think of is creative solutions tailored for the specific context that all equally respect people's rights. Now, some examples of what we saw during the elections, right? What some regions did was they took the pre-bunk disinformation approach, which is that these platforms and working with different stakeholders, what they did is they would identify topics and issues that are at particular risk of becoming part of a disinformation campaign. They would anticipate false claims because one can identify trends based on what is happening online, right? And proactively provide accurate information about those topics so that the space for disinformation to thrive lessens. For anyone looking, there are diverse sources of information available, including those with accurate information. And then you don't fall into this trap of truth versus lie, right? I mean, ultimately, what is happening with this whole disinformation issue is I may be lying, but I still have the freedom of expression at some level to be lying, right? So there's that very nuanced and complicated question around if something is a lie, should it just take away my free expression altogether? So I think the moment we start increasing the sources of information that are available, increasing the number of perspectives and dialogues that are available, accurate information will find its way to those looking, right? We have seen examples of this. Some other alternative mechanisms potentially include structurally maintaining the independence and of fact checking units and their ability to thrive. In India, for example, recently we had a law that required fact check units, or well, authorized the government to notify fact check units that would be able to take decisions around any content online that pertains to quote unquote business of the government, right? Now, this has been held unconstitutional now by a court. So this is a good step, but if we were to go back, like let's say this is before the final hearing happened, which was about a month ago, we were in a scenario where fact check units were potentially completely compromised, where their ability to thrive was completely at stake. So, I mean, we need to be able to maintain a legal and regulatory environment where fact check units can thrive and can remain independent from the executive. And again, with the evolution of technology, there are newer means to find ways to identify manipulated material, right? Like whether that is through content provenance mechanisms or user empowerment tools, just equipping users with better and more resources to question what they see online, whether that is awareness campaigns or technology based solutions, platform based tools. There are several other alternatives, I think, that we're already seeing and will potentially see more of. So, well, in a nutshell, I think ultimately diversity of information, tools that empower users, stronger trust and safety teams within these platforms that can actually follow up on user reports and complaints, and independent oversight authorities to check the spaces where misinformation overlaps with free speech. That's going to be key moving forward.
Thank you, Namrata, for those thoughtful alternatives to internet shutdowns. Your suggestions makes it clear that governments can take other approaches to maintaining public order without compromising rights to fundamental rights to access to information and freedom of speech. Miraj, as we close, I'd like to turn to collective action. With the rising trend of internet restrictions in Bangladesh and other South Asian countries, what role can collective actions from journalists, researchers, civil society organizations, advocacy groups, and human rights defenders play in addressing these issues? What specific strategies or actions would you recommend to enhance collaboration among these groups in advocating against internet shutdowns and ensuring that citizens' voices remains heard?
Yeah, sometimes these shutdowns are like depends on jurisdictions, no? So it doesn't happen in every country. So I think there is less global attention on internet shutdowns than on freedom of expression, no? So or other digital rights discourses. Uh, Given that, I think the first, according to my opinion, I think the first way is how you document internet shutdowns and its impact. Because if you need to argue that internet shutdown is bad, I think it is better to be argued with informed reports, no? So the argument should be informed, and this creates the basis for informed argument. There should be more research on impact documentation, no? So not only but also internet shutdown measurement. As Namrata mentioned, there are a lot of shutdown that is not even documented because we don't have capacity in that locality to measure that internet shutdown and document it scientifically, no? So this is one measurement. How do you impact, how do you also measure the economic and other social, health, education, human rights impacts of these particular things? Number one. Number two is, I think, uh, is based on that, I think legal advocacy that is pretty strong in India and probably not there in Bangladesh so much. So, is there a scope for litigations based on those informed evidences? No, so this is another area where people can look at, and then there should be more push for like take accountability. The service providers should be accountable. How do you create an ecosystem where civil society, journalists, media, and others really hold these companies accountable? Because sometimes we have seen that a push from industry is more effective than a push from civil society, no, because of these interests sometimes, no. So I think how you bring in on industry in this kind of discussion, human rights discussion, and promote this idea of a business and human rights principles in practice in your country, I think that is critical. But not less importantly, I think we should have more practical capacity building for at-risk groups. But when there is a shutdown, how do you ensure your safety and ensure that your voices are heard? No? So I think that lacks in many countries. Even we can see some level of advocacy in terms of traditional advocacy, but we don't see really hands-on support for the victims. So I think that is another area where international and local organizations really work on. But also, I think how do you uh, develop technologies that really can, because it depends on political decisions of the government. Even if you have a good laws, regimes, and everything, if the government decides to shut down, they will. So how do you develop technologies that can help certain communities so that information can be shared more freely and accessibly? So I think there should be more investment in circumvention technologies, but also in accessing internet, even if local law restricts the available internet in your country so that you have access. But it is also about like financial capacity and resources. For example, say you want to buy a Starlink connection in Bangladesh, you can probably buy it, but it is still yet not legal. So you are exposing yourself to legal risks. But even in Myanmar, it is not only legal, but you really can be arrested for using Starlink. This is one side of it. But another side of it is for countries where you have permissions for using Starlink, it is cheaper for, because it is illegal in some countries for and if it is a remote age, for example, a $500 Starlink can become a 5,000 or $15,000 product to user, because there are a lot of challenges in carrying that devices to that particular remote location for the journalist media group or so the civil society group, so there are, I think these resources should be made available to countries where those are more prone to internet shutdowns, and local and international organizations can really collaborate in that.
Thank you, Miraj, for those valuable recommendations on collective actions and the role of collaboration in fighting internet restrictions. It's clear that ensuring citizens' voices are heard requires both strategic advocacy and collective efforts across different sectors. Now, with that, that concludes our main question and answer session with the speakers. Thank you, Namrata and Miraj, for sharing your valuable insights and contributing to such an engaging discussion. We have covered a lot of ground, from the complex realities of internet shutdowns to the broader impacts on digital rights, journalism, and human rights protections. Namrata, I'd like to confirm, would you be available for open floor discussion?
Rashmi, I can stay on for another 5 to 7 minutes, but unfortunately not more.
Okay. With that said, I'll be focusing on Namrata's questions first. Is that okay with you, Miraz?
Sorry about that, Miraj.
Okay. There is a question in the chat box which says, okay, it's a question from Ravina Kesi. In reference to the Manipur incident you cited today, I have a query regarding state liability in the context of internet shutdowns. In situations where harm or damage is resulted from an internet shutdown, be it economic damage or psychological damage, what is the current stance on compensation? Is the state liable for these damages?
That's a great question and potentially a good proposal for advocacy as well. What we're seeing right now is It's actually the opposite. What happens is within the legal framework, there are certain authorities that have the power to issue shutdown orders, which might be at the central level or state level. But in fact, what is happening is that several other authorities are also issuing shutdown orders, and which go through. Shutdowns are imposed while following these orders. So even those authorities that don't actually under the law have that power, they are not being held accountable for issuing those orders. So I mean, that's what I mean when I say it's actually the opposite, let alone holding them to account for what happened. Even those who don't have the legal authority, there currently is no accountability mechanism. I think part of the reason, or part of the challenge with suggesting that such damages be paid is the difficulty of establishing a causal link. Now, of course, there are several researchers and organizations that have come up with very innovative ways to assess the economic damage that a shutdown might have done. Um, but those, again, you will see that even within allies, the methodology differs. So, I mean, not everybody arrives at the same ish figure either, right? The same figure is out of the question, but it's often like the range is also very different. And this is even harder to do in the context of things that cannot be put down to figures and numbers, right? Like damages other than economic and financial damages. How do you quantify or seek damages for what women went through in Manipur when the shutdown was? So, I mean, that's a very valid question. And in fact, I think if states were put on the spot and said that you should be liable to pay damages for this, it is something that would at least trigger debate, right? I mean, sometimes often the strategy with policy suggestions is not to achieve that exact thing, but to go to another direction because this will help you trigger that conversation. So it would be interesting, but I don't see a way to like establish that causal link between an internet shutdown and this concrete harm that occurred as an exact result of that, which is different from occurred within the context of that.
Thank you, Namrata. I would also like you to address one more question. Is that okay with you? Okay. Rishabh has been asking one question to Namrata that in light of international human rights frameworks, how did India's internet shutdown stand up to scrutiny? Are there legal mechanisms that could help hold the government accountable at an international level?
They certainly don't stand up to scrutiny under international human rights laws, right? Because, I mean, whether you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and several other reports specifically on rights in the digital age, none of the thresholds that should be fulfilled in respect of restrictions to free speech and all these other rights that we have been discussing, none of those thresholds are met in India. And consider this, India is the world's largest democracy. In the report that we have published over the last many years, and particularly the data I'm referring to is from the last 2 years, India led the count in terms of the number of shutdown orders issued. The second position last year and the year before that was held by Myanmar and Ukraine, both of which are countries going through tremendous crisis. The reason I mention this is that this shows that India, in many ways, is an outlier, right, among democracies. To have a democratic framework that abides by all these international laws and framing of fundamental and human rights, there is no way that these shutdowns would kind of match what is expected, or what the duty of these democracies is, right? So that's one. In terms of how accountability could be, well, how accountability could be strengthened, there are several mechanisms. Recently, for example, there was a review by the Human Rights Council, the committee at the UN level, and they do country specific reviews, right, every year. And this year, the India report that came out, it made references to freedom of expression, privacy, and so on. So one way is to concretely try and include harms happening in the digital space or consequent to digital activities, including internet shutdowns within these reports. Um, Policy proposals now, just because of how copycat legislation has worked, like even between India and Bangladesh, we have seen so much copycat legislation, which means that now when a government invites comments on a policy proposal, even people from outside the country send in feedback because it affects their ability to communicate, conduct trade, and so on. So when these happen, like the Telecom Act, telecom rules, people should send in comments internationally. That helps. This is not just for India; it's for any country, including like all the South Asia countries that we are currently talking about. So whether it is UN bodies or whether it is like talking to the press about it or sending in formal comments, it's always better to get more attention. And lastly, I think in terms of international platforms, G20, G7, all of these states, of course, prioritize them for very good reason. So if something comes up at as a topic at these fora, states will take that seriously. G7, for example, a couple of years ago in their declaration, they made several commitments specifically on internet shutdowns. And news articles said that India held back on a lot of the language. So, that kind of international engagement is very useful to keep the pressure alive.
Thank you, Namrata, for your time and insights today. For the questions that has been directed to you will be shared to you via email, and hopefully you can answer those questions. We appreciate your contributions and look forward to sharing the questions with you. We hope to connect with you again soon. Thank you, Namrata.
Thank you, Rashmi, so much. And Miraj, thank you once again for accommodating this request. And thank you all so very much for listening. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Namrata. Now we'll be directing questions that has been asked to Miraj. First question would be from Sudin Kestrester. Discuss how shutdowns cut off vital access to digital support systems, including mental health services, crisis hotlines, and online safe spaces for women and youth facing harassment, violence, or discrimination.
I think we all know it does, no? So there are several impacts in terms of accessing health services, not only mental health. Uh, Shutdown, for example, imagine a scenario. So there is a shutdown in Nepal. There is a severe violence going on in. Your son and daughter is in college, and there is a shutdown. You just cannot talk to him or her. What kind of mental trauma you will go on with? Now, say for example, one of your cousins lives abroad, there is violence going on in, and they cannot call you from Dubai, or say from any other country, and they don't know how their family is doing. I think you cannot measure this, no? So there are immense impact on this psychological impact of shutdowns as well. I think the idea is how you we document it, that it is not one of incident, rather it is creating a lot of bad impact on a great number of people. I think that is what makes advocacy stronger. No, so I think that is where we lack. We are not yet able to document the impact of shutdowns in a meaningful way, because it is too much like in jurisdictions, different jurisdictions, and a lot of civil society organizations do not really have that technical and other capacity to this kind of research. But I think one of the way to fight this is having more documentation, and it not only health, it cuts access to a lot of services. You cannot order food because you cannot buy a book, you cannot pay for exam, you cannot sit in, say for example you have a job interview, probably you are missing that, and it is a devastating impact on a job seeker, but probably a lot of others do not really feel that way. So I think there are several layers of impact that is not even discussed in this current ongoing advocacy discussions.
Thank you, Miraj. Indeed, internet shutdown has an immense impacts on every field. There is another question that has been directed towards you by Rohit Dahal. How does the lack of internet access, especially during shutdowns, affect women and young people, particularly in areas where they already struggle to participate in technology and online activities?
It disproportionately affect them, no? So for example, for example uh, in each of our countries, youth are the main users of internet. Even say there is an adult person who is very senior, even if that person have access to internet, he is habituated to read print newspapers, to walk, to talk to people. But lives of young men and women are pretty much centered around internet. So whenever there is a shutdown, this group of people are always disproportionately affected. Now there are vulnerable groups. Say, for example, there is a vulnerable group who really organize on internet because they're not public facing groups, so they have issues in their societies. For example, in different countries we have, for religious and many other reasons, certain groups only organize on the internet. So I think they become the most disconnected when internet shutdown is going on, and their security, their risk really heightens in these kind of times, because they cannot seek help from another, from their community, because there is no connectivity. So if it responds to your question, I think all of these groups that you mentioned are disproportionately affected during this kind of censorships.
Thank you, Miraj, for sharing your valuable insights and contributing to such an engaging discussion. With this said, we have approached to the end of this session, and I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to our esteemed panelists, both Miraj and Namrata, for sharing their invaluable insights, and to all our participants for your thoughtful engagement. Today's discussion has truly highlighted the critical role that internet access plays in upholding democracy and protecting human rights. This dialogue is just the beginning. We look forward to exploring more pressing topics in the upcoming episodes of the Digital Dialogue series. Until then, signing off, this is Advocate Rasmi Buzil, your moderator for today's session. Thank you all and have a wonderful evening ahead. Thank you, Miraz.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone.